how to choose the right mat for your workplace. Big topic, a lot of content to cover. We're going to move fairly quickly through this, so I'm sure there'll be some questions. The idea for today's webinar is to try and give some tips and tricks that we've found that have been successful in the past when answering this question, and try and also think about some ways to standardize so that you don't have to answer this question over and over again. You actually can build this into some sort of a formula that'll work as you go. So appreciate everyone's time today. Going to get started here. My name is Russell Herbert, account manager here at Acromat. Nice to see you again if you've been on here before. If this is your first time to one of our webinars, welcome. Great to have you. And I'm very excited today to be joined by Lindsey Kuefler, EHS specialist from the Toro Company. Had the privilege of working with Lindsey for a number of years, and she's going to share some of her insights into this topic as well. So thanks for joining, Lindsey. The agenda for today's session, these are the points we're going to cover off on. Firstly, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be talking a little bit about standardizing and how that can help answer this question of how to choose the right mats for your workplace. So why is it helpful to standardize the mat use in your facility? We'll be looking at the selection steps to help you create that standard. We'll be doing a little bit of a deeper dive into the different mat types that we offer here at Acromat to help address, which one could be used for which environment. We're going to touch briefly on areas that you might want to think about avoiding mats. So may seem like an interesting one, but we're going to touch on that as well. And then after that, I'll be handing over to Lindsey to share some of her thoughts. And we'll be finishing up with questions and answers. So as we get to that point, if you have questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A as we go. And then we'll address those at the end. And also if you have questions for Lindsey, she said she's willing to field some of those too. So we'll get started. What is standardizing and how can that help you? So we want to talk a minute about how making a standard is going to help address this issue of the right mat for the application. So one common practice that we've had very great results with is to standardize your mat use into what we call a work instruction. You may have your own template, your own formula, or your own format, I should say, that would work in this instance, and feel free to use those. We have a template as well, which we'll be referencing. You can see that on the screen. So standardizing, what we find quite often when we first visit a facility, is not unusual for that company to have anywhere between 10 to 15 different types of mats being used in their environments. That in itself can create a lot of safety issues to the mats that are being used, can create the trip hazards. All those types of issues can become much more likely when you have multiple different mats being used. It also leads to reactive buying. So whenever a mat is needed, somebody's going to have to do some research and figure out something, and then they may order a completely different mat again from what you've already been using. So that's why standardizing is important. You can actually eliminate a lot of those issues and also eliminate a lot of the decision making for all your people there that may be involved in mat projects. So as you see on the screen, I think there's 4 different mats pictured in this before picture, and the after is just one mat type. So that's what we mean by standardizing. So how do we do this? Some steps that we want to walk you through as we go on this journey of standardizing. First step number 1, is to conduct a facility assessment. So this is something you and your team can do. We can also be available to help as well if you have particular questions or need some extra assistance with this. But what the idea here is that you'll do an assessment of your whole facility, and you'll evaluate all the different environments that may be present at your facility. So some examples of that, as you see on the screen. So you may have a number of machining departments or grinding departments or welding or clean rooms, whatever it might be. You can start grouping all your work areas into those different environments, and that helps to start create this standard work instruction that then you can standardize the mats for. But without doing this step, it becomes very difficult and very confusing to try and put anything together. But when you start by grouping into departments, it makes the next few steps go a lot easier. So that's step number one. Step number two, once you've got your list of the different environments involved, then you would start the mat selection process. So then lining up what mat is going to work in each of these different types of environments that we have present. So some examples on the screen of the mats that we offer. We'll touch on those. And as I've said before, if you this can apply to any types of mats and any types of environments and industries that you may have present. You can then start narrowing down what is the right mat for each of the departments that we have listed. So some examples here, maybe clean room, maybe anti-static with ESD, maybe you have a food industry, and so on and so forth. So as you start to identify those departments, then you can line that up then with the different mat types. So we're going to touch on each of these Acromat options here. So we've got a few different options for you to consider. The first one here is the 101 series. And this was our most versatile mat on the market. It is really a true workhorse. You can use it in so many different environments, different applications. It's our top seller by a long shot because it's so versatile and it can be used in so many different instances. It is 100% nitrile rubber. And just to give you some ideas on where this can be used, machine shops are a great option, wet, oily areas, and then the opposite extreme of the dry, dusty areas as well. You may have, as I mentioned, food production is a great option for the 101 mat. It is suitable for grinding and brazing, so that sort of type of work is suitable for this mat. Although we wouldn't recommend it in a true welding cell, it is okay in more of a lighter grinding, brazing type environment. Packaging and shipping lines is really common, and then production assembly lines, especially when you start getting into those long lengths, those bigger production areas that have a lot of surface area. This can be a great fit for that, as well as retail. So cashiers, registers, things like that. So a lot of different applications. I realize we're probably not going to catch everybody's different environments on the call today, but just to give you some ideas of where this can be used. A couple other points: antimicrobial, impervious to liquids, chemical resistant. So really a great versatile mat. So some of the things you want to look for if you're choosing other mats as well. In environments like these, you just want to look at longevity. How long is the mat going to last? Is it going to really truly be able to cover all these different environments, or is it more suited for one over the other? So those are things that you'll want to consider as looking at these types of environments. Next up, we're going to touch on clean rooms. This is another common one, especially medical device, pharmaceutical, things like that, where there's clean rooms or controlled environments or labs, things like that, where you need that clean room type product. So with the 100 clean room series, it is also 100% nitrile rubber, but we have had it independently tested and it's approved up to a class 5 clean room. So if you have those controlled environments, those clean rooms, it's a great mat for those areas because you can have the confidence that it's not going to shed, give off any foreign material, things like that. And a couple of things to look out for here when looking for clean room mats is, does it have that certificate that comes with it, or is it just something that has maybe been tested in more of a controlled environment as opposed to a true clean room rated mat? So that's one of the important things to look out for. You also obviously want to think about things as to how customizable is it. A lot of clean rooms, as you see in the picture, needs more of a custom type layout, so you want to be mindful of those as well. Anti-slip properties, chemical resistant, things like that, they can all come into play depending on what else is in the environment there. So those are some things to be mindful of in the clean room controlled environment areas. The next one is our ESD. We don't want to touch on that. So for any areas that are sensitive, require the static dissipation, you will be thinking about having an ESD mat in those areas. So with the 100 ESD series, it has a carbon black additive, which makes it ESD safe. And so you want to think about things like that. The grounding snaps and cords, is that necessary? Or do you have an ESD safe floor, perhaps, that is in place as well? If that's the case, then maybe you don't need the grounding snaps and cords. The mat can actually conduct through the floor as well. So those are questions to ask as you're creating this standard where ESD areas are involved. Another note, if you do have a ESD safe area within a clean room, this mat is also suitable for those environments as well. Should we have, the needs for the chemical resistance, things like that, you want to pay attention to those questions in your areas as well. So a couple of things to point out when considering ESD, ours or otherwise, would be, do we need the grounding snaps? Do we need the grounding cords? What sizes are we looking to create here? Do we need custom shapes, custom layouts, or is it more of a standard setup that we have? So those are things. And then you also want to think about the actual conductivity ratings on the mats as well. Make sure they're up to the standard that you need for those particular areas. One other note on the ESD material, as it has the carbon black additive, that just makes it so that we're not able to actually add the yellow safety edge on ESD mats. It just comes with the black safety edges you see in the picture. Next up, the Nitrituf. So this is the diamond mat series. Great for heavy duty environments. It is a slightly thicker mat than the 101 series. It's 3/4 inch compared to the 5/8. It has the 3-inch premium nitrile borders applied as well that prevent the curling up. And this one is great for a lot of areas. It can overlap in some ways with the 101. It can be used in a lot of the same sort of areas, such as machine shops, dry and dusty, that grinding, brazing again, production assembly lines. And also a common one for this is areas that are prone to abrasion. So if you have maybe parts getting set on the mat regularly that could potentially wear down the 101 series quicker, you may want to think about this because it has the heavy duty top surface. It's going to prevent any sort of damage from parts that may be coming in contact with the mat. So that's a couple of the features about this one. We think of it as the heavy duty alternative to the 101 for those more industrial sort of environments. And then the other thing can also come into play here is some user preference. So it does have a bit of a firmer feel to it than the 101. And sometimes operators may prefer that type of a mat over the 101 series. So when you have an area where both mats are an option, we strongly recommend doing some testing and getting some user feedback as to which one is preferred and which one really is doing a better job for the operators in that area. So do some side-by-side comparisons, and then that'll help you make the decision then on which one is going to be more appropriate for those areas. Touch briefly on the X60. This is our entry-level anti-fatigue mat. It's a roll mat. It's a PVC blended nitrile rubber foam, available in widths up to 6 feet, and then in rolls of 60 feet in length. So this one has the beveled edges on the long sides, but it can be cut to length. So it's like I said, an entry-level type product. It has a great use for things like you see here, long hallways, limited budget applications, maybe temporary workstations, low traffic workstations, things like that. And sometimes clients like to keep them in the tool crib. So if they have like a one-off installation, they need something quickly, they can actually cut this to length, and then they have an option, maybe even whilst they're still planning for a more permanent solution. This can be put in place just to give some comfort whilst we're working on the bigger one. So those are some ideas for the X60. It's a great product. There's a lot of raw mats on the market, and so some things you want to consider about raw mats is obviously the bevel. Do they have a bevel? What happens when I cut to length? Is there a way to create a bevel there, or do we just live with the square ends? And then there's also things like the construction of the mat itself. So with this, as it's a blended nitrile rubber foam, it does keep its form very well compared to something that's more like a PVC type foam, where it's going to over time compress, lose its anti-fatigue, and potentially even tear and rip in a short space of time as well. So some things to consider when thinking about more of the entry level. Once you've got through aligning then what type of mat you're going to assign to each of your different departments that we identified in step 1, then the next step then is to actually start thinking about what type of options are going to be right for your areas as well. So things to think about there is, do we want just the black borders? Do we want yellow safety edges? If we want the yellow, does that have to be on all sides or just the access points? So start asking yourself some questions about where how the borders should be made. Do we need drainage holes? So do we have any areas where there's a lot of liquids, fluids, chemicals, things like that? Do we need to allow anything to drain through? Do we need any cable covers? So that could be another one where you have areas where there's maybe conduit, electrical cords, air hoses, power cords, whatever it might be that's crossing the area. Do we need to be able to accommodate some sort of a cable cover in the mat to prevent any trip hazards with those? Do we need any anti-slip options? So that would be particularly appropriate if it's a smaller mat. You have a smooth polished concrete or tile floor, something like that, that mats are more prone to move around on. Do we need to be able to offer something that's going to prevent that with some sort of an anti-slip product like our grip coat? Do we need, as we've mentioned, any ESD options? Do we need the grounding cords, the grounding snaps, or is the ESD safe mat okay as it is? And then lastly, in the food industry or maybe some other controlled environments, do we need to be able to separate areas by using different colored mats? So you could have, one department have one color, another department has another color, so it prevents any sort of cross-contamination then between those areas. And once you start building those together, then now we've got your areas identified. We've selected some mat types that we want to use for each of the different departments in question. And then we've identified the type of options that we'd like to use within those mats. Then we can actually pull that all together, put it into the standard work instruction template. And as I said, you may have your own templates that you use, a standard work procedure or whatever you may call it. You can actually then document this, distribute it within your company to anybody that may be involved. So as we said at the beginning, there can be lots of different mat types in use, and that can be because there's a lot of different people involved in purchasing mats for your organizations. This document helps eliminate all of that by giving them a guide to work to. So within this department, we use this type of mat, and these are the options we want applied. So it takes the decision making away from having to make that decision every time you need to purchase a mat. Obviously, as things change, if you get new departments, new areas, new mat types are available, things like that, then you can actually start building that back into the document and updating it as you go as well. I did want to touch just briefly on some areas that you might want to think about avoiding mats. We get questions on these regularly, so I just wanted to touch briefly on a few things here. So any areas where there's super heavy car, forklift, or even vehicle traffic, those things don't mix very well with mats, so you're probably better off not having mats in those areas unless you can make them in a way where they're not going to interfere with that traffic flow. So any sort of aisleways or things like that where there's a lot of heavy traffic, just avoid having mats out there, because usually that creates more hazards than it solves. So think about that one. If you have constantly changing layouts, and by that I mean, every job that comes through is completely different. The work tables get rearranged daily. those areas are difficult to put any type of matting in because they're always changing. But what sometimes can be successful there is more of an individual mat for a workstation that can move with the workstation. So something to think about there. Obviously, primarily sitting. If you have back and forth work areas, so a lot of back and forth with your workforce, the area is just too big to accommodate some sort of a mat, then maybe it's best to avoid mats in those areas. And then lastly, I wanted to touch on too, if you have a complex area, a custom shape, don't try and fill it with a bunch of standard mats because you'll end up creating a lot more hazard than it's worth. So in those areas, we recommend obviously using AcroSketch, design the mat that fits the area properly without any seams or overlapping or trip hazards being present. So with that, I wanted to hand over to our guest speaker for the day. I realized we covered a lot of information in a short space of time, but these slides are available and these resources will be shared after the fact as well. So I wanted to welcome Lindsey Kuefler from the Toro Company. Lindsey, thank you so much for taking some time out to join us today and share your experiences with Acromat. So I'll turn it over to you to get started.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I have been at Toro for about 6 years. When I started here, our site pretty much looked like the 4 pictures on the left there. Throughout the facility, we had any number of different mats. We had mostly anything that you can get from the standard sources like Grainger, Fastmail, or whatever. We just kind of hodgepodge mixed them together in different areas. We didn't really have any rhyme or reason to what we used. Most of the diamond plated mats that you see in the bottom left-hand corner were slippery. The edges on those got pretty slick in our oily areas, and we ended up having an injury because of it. So we had an employee who stepped on the edge of one of those mats and fell and broke his wrist and was out for a number of months with that injury. So I called Russell at Acromat and had him come in and help kind of design out the cell. That's that bottom right-hand picture actually. And we put together a bunch of different mats, had beveled edges on some ends where the operator might be stepping, and then not on other ends. And we got it pretty much fit to perfect. So we have holes in some and holes in not in others. It's been super helpful to have a standard work. When I was out for a couple months, it was really easy to just send this out and say, hey, if you needed to order any mats while I'm gone, just use this document, order from Russell, and it was super easy. I came back, everybody had gotten the mats that they needed in the time that they needed. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to talk about, I guess. We've been using you guys for 5 years and it's been going really well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lindsey, for sharing your experiences. I well remember the day you called me about that incident you referred to, and those are the worst kind of phone calls to get or emails to receive when somebody's actually received an injury. So what we're talking about today is ways that we can be more proactive so that those hopefully those phone calls and emails become a lot less going forward. So so that brings us to the conclusion of today's webinar. We will answer a few questions. I'll jump into that in just a second. First question I had here about having a job number on the mat to use for future referencing. That's a great question, and we do have that option. So anytime you're ordering a custom mat for a particular work cell or work area, please tell us the name of that area, whatever makes sense to you, and we can actually have a label on the mat with that referenced. And then for future reorders, you can always then just say, I need to reorder a mat for XYZ cell, and we'll actually have that on file as long as you provide it to us up front with the drawing. So that's a great question. The X60 Series question, do they come in rolls that can be cut to size? They certainly do. So they're 60-foot lengths, and then there's sort of designed to where you can just cut that to length on site. We can also cut to size for you as well and bevel those ends before they leave if you have the specific dimensions, but you are also able to just cut off of the roll on site as well. Another question here about the ESD matting. That is correct that it doesn't have the yellow border option because of the carbon black that's added. So the ESD material is only available in black. However, we have done it a couple of times where the client is okay with having a non-ESD yellow border added. Obviously, the very outside of the mat is not ESD safe in that case, but as long as there's an understanding up front that that's suitable for the environment, that could be an option. Otherwise, it is just the black border that's ESD safe. Question here about some literature. We certainly have a catalog that we can share with you as well on that, so we'll follow up on that one. Cleaning process, we have information on the cleaning of these mats as well. And in fact, we did hold a webinar a couple of months ago about care and cleaning, particularly on the 100 series mats as well. So that's available on our YouTube channel. The ESD mat used in clean rooms, that's correct. That can be also a safe option as well. How do you decide on the correct thickness? That's an interesting and good question as well. So our 100 series mats are all 5/8 inch thick, and we've done some research and some testing, and we've found that that's the optimum thickness for that type of mat. You get too much thicker on a nitrile foam mat, and you can kind of have that more walking in sand feeling, where it tends to slow you down and not be as comfortable in the end. So that is the only thickness on the 100 series. The X60 has two options, either 3/8 or 5/8, and then the Nitrituf is the 3/4 inch. So a couple of tips there on the thicknesses. Question here about a platform. A platform with water on it. So that's another good question. So we do a lot of mats up on raised platforms, and you can do the drainage holes in those as well to allow liquids, whatever, to fall through. And our recommendation whenever doing a mat on a platform is to fill the area completely. That helps prevent it from moving around, especially if there's a lip up the edge of those platforms as well. So there may be some more to that question afterwards that we can follow up on too. Kind comment here from Adam. Says, just wanted to say how well your mats do for us from a 5S standpoint. Not only worker safety, which obviously is paramount, but also aesthetics. So thank you, Adam. That's much appreciated. Mats for the wet areas, we recommend the 101 series mats for any areas that are wet and oily. So I think that gets through most of the questions we had. As I said, if there's anything else, we can follow up afterwards. We will be sharing some resources out afterwards as well with you, and please join us on the next webinar. We love the feedback. We love your participation, and the questions are always great. We love to see that coming in as well. So thank you all for attending today. Hope it's been beneficial. What we really hope is that there's some tips in here that no matter where you're at on your journey, you may be just starting, you maybe haven't worked with us at all, you may be a long way down the road with Acromat, and hopefully there's something in here you can pick up and action in your facilities that's going to help make those decisions easier as they come up, ultimately keep people safe whilst they're at work. So